Hey, this is Ina, in with you in the fight back. Okay, today let's do some Mao and do one of his most famous, sweeping, passionate works called Report on an Investigation of the Peasant Movement in Hunan. And was written in about 1927, and Mao was looking at the peasant movements in the Hunan province of China. And he had spent about 5 or so weeks there in early 1927, roughly from January through early February. And Mao was actually sent by the party, which was still in rough alliance with the nationalists at this time. So the communists and nationalists were still allied, even though uh, this alliance was beginning to be frayed at this point, because the nationalists, to put it very simplistically, is roughly allied with the national bourgeoisie, and the landlords, and the Communist Party is aligned with the working class. And they see that they have a common interest in promoting a national revolution, even though their class interests will ultimately diverge through struggle. Now, this break will actually come later on, and at this point the alliance is becoming frayed, and the party is worried because in Hunan province the peasants are rising up. They are confiscating landlords, they are punishing the local bullies and the corrupt officials, and this is described as atrocities by the landlords. Notice that's always an atrocity, not their regular form of rule that oppresses and exploits people. That's considered normal and okay. That aside. And the party is sending Mao, who was working as a peasant activist at this point, to Hunan to investigate, to restrain the peasantry. They don't want to antagonize their nationalist allies, because the party at this point is not really in favor of the type of peasant revolution, of an agrarian revolution that would later become one of the major hallmarks of the Chinese Revolution. Mao goes to Hunan, and if there's one thing Mao can do very well, it's investigate, it's listen, and it's summarize and synthesize what he learns. And what happens? Well, Mao comes through this, and he sides with the peasantry. And he knows they've suffered for generations. He had grown up in the countryside. He knew this. He knew the injustices and indignities the peasantry had suffered. And he praises their actions, rightfully so. And he's saying, look at this. These peasants are rising up. These so-called inert masses, and they're shaking society. They can shake earth and heaven itself. And he says that the peasant rising can only benefit the revolution. It can benefit the Communist Party. It can lead to a new China. And this force of rising peasants is so powerful, the millions upon millions of peasants of China, that no force can stop them. And he looks at the so-called atrocities the peasants have done against the landlords, the corrupt officials, and he's saying that, so what? Essentially. So they're exceeding proper limits. But that has to be done to right a wrong. And Mao describes how these millions are drawn into this movement, how they attack the landlords and the rapists who rape their wives and their daughters, and how they form new associations, how they're empowering themselves and shaking society. And Mao, instead of following the so-called party prerogative of criticizing this, is criticizing those who are not siding with the peasantry. He's saying that those revolutionaries who call this terrible are wrong. He praised this as an historic rising, and that said revolutionaries should be thrilled at this. Why? Because the peasant actions are not just right and fine, they're empowering people, which is what communism is about, what communists are for. And he says, again, looking at these atrocities, he's saying a revolution isn't a dinner party. It isn't something refined and magnanimous. It is an act of violence. It's an insurrection where one class overthrows another. Mao understood this and put himself upon the side of those who are rising. Whatever atrocities and limits that they exceeded, he's saying theirs is the rising class. Theirs is the empowerment of those who have been crushed, demeaned, and degraded for generations to finally rise up and seize their destiny into their hands. And what were the peasants doing? They're not only organizing themselves and striking at landlords, both politically and economically. They're overthrowing the decayed husks of feudal rule. They're defeating the landlord armies. They're organizing themselves for self-defense. They're not being told, essentially, but they're doing it themselves. And they're starting movements for education and cooperatives and old customs that are being cast aside in this great maelstrom of revolution. Gambling and levies, all of it being wiped aside by the rising masses of the peasantry. And Mao is saying that there are those revolutionaries who praise popular risings, who praise empowerment of the masses, but they condemn it in reality. And he is putting himself clearly on the side of those who are rising in reality, siding with the actual and trying to make its potential realized. This work on the peasant movement in Hunan is not just a sweeping work. It is not just passionate. It's well argued. It's not, when it is seething with its fire for revolution, it is also logical. And it is showing Mao's firm grasp on China's developing agrarian revolution, showing the flame that will tear aside the old order and build a new one, a new, more just China that unfortunately is no longer with us. But Mao's work it shows us how revolutionaries not only analyze society, analyze these movements, but seek to keep them going, to develop them, and to cast down the old order and build a new one. This work inspires me, and it should inspire you. So, until next time.